human beings are like fish in water that don't know we're living in water, and that there's all these other invisible forces moving through the water all the time. And the water is the spiritual world around us. We're embedded in it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today I wanted to discuss the idea of non-human intelligences and subtle realities. So as you see, I had a short clip there of Dr. Gilbert, which I'm going to include the full clip of that at the end of the video, along with a part of a clip of Jim Semivan talking about similar issues, which is going to be, again, non-human intelligences and subtle realities, kind of the bigger picture and the deeper aspects of the conversation of non-human intelligence beyond kind of surface level uh, UFOs, uh, crash retrievals and crash retrieval programs, which is all important, but it's really surface level of the conversation when we get to the bigger questions of non-human intelligence, the nature of non-human intelligence, uh, the subtle realities, and even the nature of reality thereof, and why we see and experience all these high strangeness aspects when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, which I'm going to describe here is not so much that the UFO phenomenon is so advanced and crazy and out there, so to speak, but also because of the human potential aspect and what do these experiences and realities actually say about us, the nature of humanity and consciousness, and how we're able to utilize that. So in this the beginning of the clip, Dr. Gilbert, which I'm going to say here, he's Dr. Gilbert is talking from a very kind of adept or advanced understanding, and he's kind of just casually glossing through it, which for some people that are interested in UFOs and not so much metaphysics may be kind of like new topics to you. So, or maybe you haven't heard something like that before, or maybe you've disregarded it or undermined it. So I just want to point out here that this stuff is kind of important to this conversation and why and how that is. So, he Dr. Gilbert, and you're going to hear even Jim Semivan say later in those clips, is that, there's non-human intelligence, right? Is potentially all around us in different dimensions or other aspects of reality that we're not just openly perceiving all the time. The UFO phenomenon clearly has the ability to interact with us, on its own terms, but by making itself more apparent in our physical 3D reality, whether it be, a craft, right, a UFO, a flying saucer, a black triangle, an orb, what have you. Um, even entities and bodies, right? Like there are physical entities involved many times as well. But then there's the aspect where you might have one of these UFOs or discs or orbs or black triangles or whatever the craft or even the entities might be. There's a reoccurring theme of these objects and entities just disappearing at will, right? Where are they going, right? When they disappear, where do they go? Are they just cloaking themselves, or are they phasing or shifting into another subtle reality, right? That's part of why I included the title in here is of subtle reality. And which in order to kind of go beyond the materialistic aspect of it would be subtle perception. So, we do have the ability as humans to have subtle perception, right? And it happens in different ways. You can have a heightened awareness just due to the UFO experience, right? And now all of a sudden you're experiencing or you're more open to uh, telepathy and downloads and even, perceiving into subtle realms, which is like energy auras, uh, apparitions, paranormal perception, right? That kind of thing is subtle perception. That's been talked about many times in all types of mystical and contemplative traditions throughout human history. They talk about these kind of abilities that humans have, that we have, and I really appreciate the UFO subject because it's kind of putting it right in our face, right? There's kind of no denying it to some aspect. So, I do want to know in these clips that you're going to see later with Dr. Gilbert and Jim Semivan, they're talking about similar things, but they're coming from a much different point of view. I would say maybe um, Dr. Gilbert's kind of a spin on it or his take on it uh, talks about how you can cultivate these your awareness and these abilities through exercises and practices, so you can more readily and more regularly, if you so choose to perceive these subtle realities. And with that, non-human intelligence of all different kinds, which again, that's a whole thing where there's also different, there seem to be different levels of non-human intelligence, from just like what people would consider a physical entity to a light being to entities that can shift into more subtle realities at will. And, there's ways in which you can cultivate your awareness and concentration so that you can more easily or readily access that level of perception. Uh, so, also kind of in your state of being, right? Like your vibe is also going to might affect and determine what you do experience during such an experience with a UFO or non-human intelligence. Based on where you're at, you may experience that event differently, right? And that gets into different practices and again where your head is at. And more than that, your subconscious definitely plays a huge role in that. And again, in some experiences, it seems that the UFO phenomenon is reflective, right? So if you're coming from like a non-dual perspective, how is that gonna affect what you experience versus if you're coming from a very victimized and fear-based paradigm? That's not to say that there isn't some other non-human intelligence which is doing something of its own accord, and that's going to determine the outcome of your experience. Because, yeah, I think that there are different non-human intelligence, uh, and you can argue what those are, right? Whether they're extraterrestrials or aliens or crypto-terrestrials or future humans. And based on the nature of that non-human intelligence, of course, that's going to influence the interaction, right? And how it goes down and what you ultimately experience. But also there's the aspect of what can we do on our end to try to more clearly experience and understand what's going on and what we can take away from that. So again, it's my perspective that we have the ability to cultivate like these facets of human potential of awareness and to even deal with these kind of experiences in a skillful way. But you know I think the kind of the big takeaway from both of what Dr. Robert Gilbert are saying and what Jim Semivan are saying in these clips that you're going to see is there's an aspect of all this that is it's way beyond just, there's UFOs and there's non-human intelligence visiting us and interacting with us. That's kind of like the in your face kind of apparent, like, wow, this is happening kind of thing. But there's another aspect of all this, which, well, what does all that mean? Right? And that is speaking more to the deeper conversation of the nature of reality. And with the nature of reality, our ability as humans to perceive those different the levels of reality, again, when the subtle reality aspect is like we actually have the ability to improve our perception to more clearly perceive subtle realities, and when such a thing occurs that we can notice it for what it is. And there's all kind of facets to this conversation, like the idea that when we're talking about subtle realities, people talk about like the astral realm or biofields and auras, experience something in a dream state or a lucid dream, uh, and experience something in the mental realm. And there's different things that can bring an opening in these in your perception about that can result in something like an interaction with non-human intelligence, or it can result in the opening of your perception where for a period of time you have increased psychic perception or psi. Um, there's all types of things that can kind of open that up. And another one of the things that can open up your subtle perception in that way and to these subtle realities is an interaction with UFOs, is an interaction with non-human intelligence. So you can just kind of be like a regular person who's not into any of this kind of weird stuff. You have a UFO encounter, and all of a sudden your subtle perception is open, and therefore you're more open to these subtle realities, at least for a period of time. But it's kind of like, once you see something, you can't really go back. There's always that part of you that can now access um, that that subtle reality to if you're willing to, right? And for a lot of people, it's spontaneous, right? It just goes on and off like a switch, and different things that can activate that subtle perception into subtle realities are things like trauma, right? A traumatic experience can open up your subtle perception to subtle realities, to non-human intelligence, to psi phenomenon, to psychic perception, to astral perception, and other realms and other entities that are generally all around us all the time. Another thing is if you become a meditation practitioner, all of a sudden you can start peering into these subtle realities either spontaneously or through very diligent practice. uh, you know, in your dream state, in lucid dreams, you're more naturally in flowing through these different levels of perception and awareness and even subtle realities itself through, out of body experiences, astral projection, and what have you. And again, since we're talking about that, yeah, like hemisync, right? Binaural tones as another method people have used to experience subtle realities and do things like out of body travel and astral travel, remote viewing, right? All that, even remote viewing, that's another modality of experiencing non-physical realities and subtle realities. Psychedelics is another thing. I know, that can be controversial for people, but it's going to alter your perception and you're going to see into different aspects of reality. And, people want to argue maybe that's a hallucination. That's another conversation, but, I want to put that in here because it does seem that people have those kind of subtle perceptions and kind of like cracks open your conventional reality to what we call the greater reality, right? And in the greater reality, that's where you're going to more readily interact with non-human intelligence of whatever kind. And again, I'm saying non-human intelligence a lot here, and that can account for a lot of things. And I think that you know it actually is a lot of things. I don't think that we're we're talking about one thing here. I do think that there's a very physical UFO phenomenon that does include physical entities that in our perception we can consider conventional, as far as like an extraterrestrial, right? That's kind of conventional in our current paradigm. Um, Even future humans, if they're time traveling and they travel back here and they're kind of like physical like us, that's another kind of conventional entity or intelligence as far as we understand it in our current paradigm, right? But I would also say that there are probably intelligences and entities that are what we would consider non-physical and or extra dimensional. So in their base reality, where they're coming from, maybe I don't want to say another dimension, but I guess that's what I can try to say non-scientifically here is they're kind of very physical in their dimension to the extent that they experience it, but to come here, they're like sh phasing or shifting into our reality, and to us that they might seem non-physical, right? But I mean, again, that's a whole nother conversation into the nature of their reality, which ultimately is our reality. But again, that's another tangent to discuss based on the level of their physicality, based on their being itself from wherever they're coming from, and if they're an an astral entity or what people would call a spiritual entity, a light being, an angel, a demon, like what level of physicality do they have? I'm sure they have some if they have form, right? Um, but again, some of these aspects I did want to also mention, Darren King from the Point of Convergence podcast. He talks about, spiritual hygiene, and I hope that that term doesn't throw people off. But, kind of based on your like where you're at, where you're coming from, uh, your level and ability to cultivate uh, your perception and kind of like being able to perceive subtle realities plays into all this and how you experience the UFO reality and non-human intelligence and really reality as a whole, and that's why it's so important to understand where you're coming from, uh, and what that says about human nature, the nature of consciousness and human potential when you're talking about all these things. So again, uh, I just wanted to say a few words, but I'm going to play these clips so you can see Dr. Robert Gilbert talk about it from a pretty adept um, level of understanding on a metaphysical understanding, I guess you can say. Um, and then you're going to see the clip of Jim Semivan when I interviewed him talking about the same thing, but in a very different way. But I think it's important to note both perspectives are like two sides of the same coin, right? I would say, Dr. Robert Gilbert's uh, perspective on this is a little bit more empowering, uh, and saying that, well, we actually have the ability to kind of like see things for what they are and filter them out, and or see them for what they are, and try to determine our consciousness from non-human intelligence, even on a telepathic level. And then, again, there's Jim Semivan talking about the indigestible aspect of this and like, can people handle this? I don't know. And they're both important parts of the discussion because, like, if you have an interaction with a non-human intelligence that's from another dimension or subtle reality, and all of a sudden a light being pops into your room, like, you might think you're having a psychotic break, right? So can you handle that? Some people go out intentionally have these experiences through different contact modalities. And, you might be ready for that, you might not be, and you're not going to know until it happens. There's people who kind of want like nothing to do with any of this to begin with, and they have an experience. And for whatever reason, these people just are able to integrate that very well. But if you can't integrate that, um, you're going to run into some problems. And that's why I think it's important to have this conversation. I was planning to do an episode or a presentation on this whole subject regarding non-human intelligence and subtle realities and how you can deal with this and how you can cultivate different aspects of your consciousness and awareness so you can deal with this. Or if you do want to intentionally do such a thing, which I know some people will say is reckless, but my experience is it happened to me uh, not to my own accord at first, and I kind of happened upon it, right? And so I had no choice to begin with one way or another, but I had them, and here I am now doing this. So somebody's got to do it, I think. Anyways, uh, so that's just some word on that, and I'll caveat this with there was a comment from Carl Nell, and he just said straight up matter of factly, like I believe it was at the SALT conference that
Here's the $1 million question. Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Carl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
Yes, there's non-human intelligence. They're interacting with us. They've been interacting with us throughout human history, and I think that is absolutely true. And I think that is like a beginning statement. And when you get into the deeper aspects of that conversation, that's what we're talking about here. Subtle realities, psi, the nature of consciousness, the nature of reality, and these kind of deeper conversations. And even me just stating that's just covering the surface. Everything that goes into that is the depth of the conversation, and I'm looking forward to discussing a lot more of that. But I hope you guys appreciate that and enjoy these clips. I'll link everything in the description. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.
Human beings are like fish in water that don't know we're living in water, and that there's all these other invisible forces moving through the water all the time. And the water is the spiritual world around us. We're embedded in it. And these beings are constantly moving through our energy field and leaving traces of emotional impulses, thought forms, things of that kind, that we have to be clear enough to perceive that, separate it from what we ourselves are generating in our thought field, and decide, do I want to go with that or with this? Mm-hmm. And as a person really opens up spiritual perception, this is where the rubber hits the road in real spiritual development. And you start perceiving non-physical beings and understanding the non-physical influences coming in without going off into some state of psychosis. It's got to be held in balance. That at that point, you can then differentiate where's this information and these impulses coming from, right? The different types of beings. So it was understood classically, and then that got lost, that we go through certain stages. The first stage is always mindfulness. It's simply to observe the content of our thoughts that we have, our emotions we have, our will impulses. Mindfulness is always the first stage, so that we become self-aware. And being self-aware, we already start to clean up a lot of our garbage. And so, seen from a particular perspective, if you develop the mindfulness so that you're aware of your internal content, then you start to clean it up a bit so that you're resonating at a higher level and more productive. But then you become aware of what's inside of your present personality. That then, as you do the vision of the eagle, and you begin to see this is a bead on a chain of multiple lifetimes, you then become more aware of your permanent personality. And then this helps you to understand what thoughts, feelings, etc. you're self-generating versus those coming in from the outside. And then at that point, you start to perceive, you can, in a healthy way, perceive non-physical beings and influences and start to have some discernment about what's the nature of the influences coming in. Because the average person who doesn't do any mindfulness, they are not aware of these influences coming in from the outside at all. They just think it's part of their own internal dialogue, if they're even conscious of it, and it doesn't go just straight to the subconscious. Mm-hmm. In the Rosicrucian tradition, there is a particular exercise or practice that's known as the 6 essential exercises. And it's basically taking mindfulness to its full extent. They say that if a person does this series of practices, then they will be safeguarded against detrimental effects of all kinds of things in the world.
I've had people who I know are in the know, and I've mentioned this before, and one of them told me the truth is indigestible. It's not something that we would be able to fully grasp or entertain, and that it's like, it would be like telling somebody something that they can't do anything about, and they don't know what the repercussions of that would be. It's so great. It's so world changing and transformational, and maybe not in a good way, So,
I mean, what could be so jarring? What could be so disruptive? I mean, bless you.
thank
Like
you.
like the idea that we're being visited by another advanced intelligence that's more advanced than us. I mean, do you think, or is it something else?
I think it's much deeper than that. Lou once mentioned to me, we were chatting about this, and I asked Lou one day what he thought, and he drew a Venn diagram, on a board, and and in the middle of the Venn, was, well, one side was consciousness and the other side was quantum theory. And the shaded part in the middle, he said, that's probably where this is. And when you think about that, what are the two things we really don't know all that much about, or that, could be extraordinarily scary? And consciousness, is it local or is it, non-local? If it's not local, not produced by the brain or the body or the mind, it really means that there is a universal consciousness that we're part of, that we're tapping into. Quantum theory, in the very early days of quantum theory in the 20s and 30s, most of the people who grasped what it actually meant was that we're immaterial, that we're basically an illusion, and that atoms in general, we've come to find this to be true, are just basically invisible. There's no matter there, and that that where just energy forms. Well, think about that for a second. If that's the case, how would the president describe that? How would the president go on national television and say, maybe he tried to do a controlled, and I'm sure, and I know they've thought about this, and I know they thought about ways to do this, and they never can come to any kind of agreement, and they always come to the agreement that it's probably best not to say anything until we have a better understanding. But what the hell do you say? I mean, you come out and you say, there's another presence in the universe which visits us, and we don't understand it, but it's capable of transforming itself into anything it wants to do. It can manipulate matter. It can manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum. It can show us things that may be real or may not be real. It can be real and not real at the same time. I mean, you can just go on and on and on. And then this whole idea of sovereignty comes in, free will comes in. And then you're worried about, will society be able to withstand it? Will, socioeconomically, what will happen? Will things stop religiously? There are so many aspects surrounding this. I'm sure people have whispered in some people's ears, do you really want to do this? Do you really want to go out and talk about this publicly? Do you have any kind of fallback position when when people start asking the million questions they're going to have, and you're basically saying we're powerless against a entity or entities that are here, we can't see, we have no idea of their intentions and capabilities. It may mean that we're just immaterial. I mean, you can get into, there's so many avenues. And then what does that open up? I mean, it's a conversation that's been going on now recently, with the power of the presidency, and where that lies. What the president can do, what the president can't do. I remember back when President Trump first became president, he was at a news conference, and he was talking about, you wouldn't believe the powers I have, and he kept going on about it and the powers I have, well, what I can do, and I think he was absolutely bowled over by what he has the power to do outside of Congress and the judicial branch. In other words, there's this unitary executive theory that's out there, about what the role the president has, particularly in extraordinary circumstances. I don't think anything is more extraordinary and more potentially dangerous than the knowledge that there is a non-human intelligence or intelligences out there that have the capability to read your mind, come into your house, threaten the idea of sovereignty, free will. How the hell do you throw this concept that, let's just say, it's a combination of quantum theory, like Lou said, it probably could be, and consciousness, two of the grandest problems that we have. I mean, in physics, and in neuroscience, and we can't wrap our arms around it. How the hell do you throw that out there? And it's like this big old meatball hanging out there, right? And you're asking people, who are consumed with their daily life. You know what it's like. You got a family, you know what I mean? You get up, you got a job, you got to do all this kind of stuff. And then somebody throws this huge thing at you and said, oh, by the way, we're not alone in the universe. And these other entities have godlike powers compared to us, can pretty much do what the hell they want, when they want. And we have no idea what the hell they're doing and why they're doing it. And they tell us stories. They tell us what? Two stories. They always tell us it's the environment and it's the nuclear problem, right? Those are the only two stories we hear. We don't hear about where humans came from. We don't hear about where they came from. They always say to people, well, you wouldn't understand, right? You wouldn't understand. So we can't get into that. Is that real? Is that not real? Are they 100 years more advanced than we are? Are they, possibly 3 or 4 million years more advanced than we are? Are they, an ultra terrestrial race that, lives on the planet with us, but maybe in another time dimension, that maybe they're vibrating a little bit faster than we are, so we can't really see them.